The Summer Birds by Penelope Farmer, Part 2, 1. 2 school weeks it took for them all to learn. The rain went as suddenly as it had come, and they were blazing golden weeks, split by an enormous storm which lit and battered half a Sunday night and sent Emma cowering to Charlotte's bed and Charlotte to stand fascinated and awed at the window to watch it. The next morning, sun caught sparkle on every leaf, and the air smelled fresh and wet. It was like the beginning of the world morning. Charlotte wished desperately that she could start again, that it was her turn to learn to fly in the glittering buttercup meadow, but it was the turn of Scooter Dimple, who was so excited after school that he jumped too high, too obviously into the air, and had to be spoken to severely in a corner by Bandy Scragg. There was a feeling of suppressed excitement in the school, mounting each day as another learned. The children became silent and stood in groups or alone, looking at each other sideways with wondering eyes. Could this really happen to others? Was it really true? Less and less they played at football and skipping rope in the yard. More and more they put their heads in the sky and watched for birds. Those who did not know, who had not learned, grew worried and lonelier as each day their numbers evaporated like water in the sun. The rest did not fly together yet. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting in half shyness for someone else to move. They were self-conscious, like people with songs to sing yet frightened of showing their voice. But on Thursday, Jamie learned. "I can fly, I can fly, I can fly," he squeaked, breathless after school, hardly out of Miss Halibut's hearing. "So can I!" they all shouted and chattered sparrow-like again. "Isn't it super? What are we going to do? Where shall we go?" Charlotte chattered with the rest. She felt they respected her as the first learner and was proud, but the boy was stern. They had to wait till Saturday to meet and plan together on the hills above the village, and they must be careful and remember their promise of silence. They all grew solemn and promised again. No one wanted to spoil everything by grown-up discovery, so they went home on their feet, not talking, but thinking happily of flight. Never had children hurried so, eating their breakfast on Saturday. Parents hardly had time to say, "George, drink your milk," or "Ginger, come down to breakfast at once." They were up and fed and out before 9. Charlotte and Emma told Miss Gosling that they were going to play with Maggot, and their grandfather Elijah said, "Oh, yes, the peacock child," absent-mindedly stroking his lock of hair before going off to a morning's astrology in his study. By 9:30, they were all on the downs, gathered on the short, tough grass, still wet. There was sharp-smelling thyme and little lady's slipper, yellow and red, clinging close to the earth under the huge sky, where the larks spiraled shrill and high. But no boy came yet. They waited on their own. Toddy sat next to Ginger and pointed at the village below. "That's your house. That's ours. That's the Scraggs," and so on. When he had finished that, he talked about something else. He always talked. Ginger said, occasionally. Marley and Bandy Scragg had a competition to see which of them could stand for the longest on their heads, and having done so, started to fight because Bandy said he had lasted longest, and Marley said she had. But it was a friendly fight. They rolled over and over, entangling long arms and legs, and occasionally stopped and lay, panting on the grass side by side, grinning identical wicked grins. Scooter Dimple also tried to stand on his head, imitating them, but quite unsuccessfully, having fallen over several times in a way that would have broken anyone else's neck, began playing with Jammy Hat. First amiably, they found little spiders and tried to race them on the wiry grass. Then they lay, ears pressed to the ground, because Jimmy said they might hear horses coming from miles off. But they heard nothing, though the thyme smelled strong in their nostrils, and the rough grass prickled their faces. Meanwhile, Baby Fumpkins sat silently and stolidly by himself, his arms clasped around his knees. Annie and Molly talked domestically in whispers, hair ribbons bobbing. Emma, who had spent less time with these two in the last days, sat where Charlotte and Maggot were, beside each other on the grass, wordlessly looking back down to the village and the trees and the yellow buttercup meadows. Soon the grass, which had been wet at first, grew drier and more pungent beneath the cloudless sky. The wide silence overcame the chatter. They were half afraid in it, that everything had been a dream, that the boy would never come. But no one spoke this fear. They sat there, silently looking. He came at last. He seemed unconcerned at their waiting, laughed because they were impatient, and they were so glad that he had come that they only said, "Hello!" joyfully to him, though Bandy Scragg growled under his breath, "Late, aren't you?" as his father said to him when he was slow in delivering the meat from the truck on alternate Saturdays. The boy, hearing, said too politely, "Am I not wanted?" And Bandy grinned unperturbed. "Joke, sir," he said cheekily. Toddy sniggered. Charlotte, peacemaking, whispered to the boy, "You must start the meeting. What are you going to say?" He smiled at her bird-like. "What shall I say? I know nothing of meetings." Before Charlotte could wonder what to suggest, Toddy, who had heard the boy's question, leaned forward confidently and said, "We gotta form a society. That's what, something proper like they do in London. I could draw up the rules, and we must swear an oath, all secret like they do on the television." He looked sideways at Baby, who had the only television set in the village. "Couldn't we have masks?" he pleaded, ideas coming swiftly to his head, but nobody wanted masks. They only wanted to fly. Yet the oath they agreed had to be taken. "Some of us aren't very good at keeping secrets," said Bandy, looking meaningly at Jammy Hat, who blushed. "What sort of oath, then?" asked the boy, and there was silence as they all sat thinking. It must be a very solemn oath. Charlotte said uncertainly, "Emma and I," but no one seemed to hear her. The words disappeared in the hot, still air. So she pulled her courage further and said, "Emma and I," rather more loudly. "Yes, what?" said Toddy. "What do you and Emma do?" And suddenly she was telling them, her voice hardly believing itself, loud on the downs. "Emma and I, we have an oath, a very solemn oath, which we swear, and we dip our hands in the rain barrels and cross ourselves and promise." "Would that be solemn enough?" she asked, and they all said yes, that was quite solemn enough. The difficulty was that up here there was no water anywhere in sight. "Blood, then," said Bandy ghoulishly. "Pricked from our arms and all mixed up," added Marley joyfully. But Molly Scobb looked shrill and said that she wouldn't have anything to do with anything that hurt. "Yes, nasty goings-on that would be," agreed Annie Feather, ponderous as her mother. Toddy glowered at his sister. "Blood," said Jammy Hat in a high, squeaky voice, which was clearly meant to be an imitation of Molly Scobb. Then, "Blood," gloatingly in a medium voice. Then, "Blood," slowly in a deep, growling voice. Then he burst out laughing and dug Scooter in the ribs. The two rolled on the ground, mock fighting. "Shut up, you," said Ginger warningly, and they sat up innocently. The rest looked around at each other. Bandy produced a scout knife and handled it lovingly, watching the others. But none of them, except him and perhaps Marley, who pointedly rolled up her sleeve, which was already short, none of them especially wanted to be pricked. Charlotte, hating blood, tried to screw up her courage, but found it hard. Annie and Molly looked as though they would go if the suggestion was carried out. "I'm not having nothing to do with it," said Annie firmly. "Not nothing." So it was with relief that they heard Toddy say, "Spit, that's what!" It seemed a good idea, solemn enough. Something of themselves mingled to enforce their swearing, and though Charlotte privately thought it horrid, and the two girls, Annie and Molly, openly turned up their noses, none of them wanted to hold up flying anymore, and the others thought it was a wonderful idea, especially the boy, who, after being strangely awkward and abruptly spoken at first, was growing in command. They all spat into a hollow made in the ground, and before the spit could dissolve in the earth, each of them in turn spoke Charlotte and Emma's oath after Charlotte, while the boy dipped his finger in the spit and crossed their hearts for them. "And may we all die in agony if we tell," they repeated together at the end solemnly. Then they stopped and were silent, looking at the boy. "Now we're a society," said Toddy, and they were silent again, all of them knowing what they wanted, but strangely shy of admitting it. "And now let's go flying," Jammy cried, springing to his feet. "Let's go flying!" And so they went, rising in the air behind the boy, the first flight together. The boy led, Charlotte and Maggot close behind, and then the others, air suddenly in them, after the close sun below. They were flying consciously as best they could to show how good at it they were. They flew the whole morning, went home regretfully to lunch, flew all the afternoon, but through the woods, because it was so hot on the downs in the glaring sun. Here they discovered treetop skimming, looking down through beech and aspen leaves to the wood floor. When they were tired, they lay on the ivied ground by the stream and ate sweets in sleepy silence, staring up at the beech leaf pattern and the silver glimmer of aspen leaves above them. They were happy, happier even than sparrows, because sparrows can always fly, but they were the only flying children. And that's the end of chapter 1.